Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to cover the weekly metagame breakdown for the standard format, the standard best of 3 format. We're going to see what's happening, what's doing well, and we're going to look at untapped data, inlay a bit of MTGO stuff. There was a cool mono white Ugin deck that top 4'd the most recent standard challenge. But let's start with popularity of the day, seeing kind of what the metrics are in terms of distribution of Mythic rank decks, basically what you're most likely to encounter in Mythic rank. And then we will look at the individual deck lists, timestamps for it in the video description. If you want to use Untapped, what you see on the screen, the link is in the video description. And if while you're there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, helps out the channel, free, easy, greatly appreciated if you can. So let's jump into it. Mythic rank for the day. Izzet Prowess, Izzet Corey Steel is the most played deck, 13%. Jeskai Oculus has seen an increase at about 12%. Mono Red at 7%. Esper Self Bounce at 6%. Orzhov Control, which is really the classification for the Orzhov Pixie deck, which plays a little bit more controlling at 6%. We have Jeskai Control or Jeskai Dragons at 5%. Omni at 5%. And then Gruul Prowess at 4%. So obviously the most notable kind of increase is the Izzet Prowess deck, peaked upwards of 20%. And then if we look at, we see a decline in Self Bounce and Mono Red, as well as an increase in Oculus. Oculus at like the start of the week was about 4%, and now it's up to double digits, low double digits. Looking at it, we got 25,000 games that were played in the last week for Mythic rank. The highest win rate deck is Izzet Prowess. So 38 matches. There's a few different variations of this deck in terms of the configuration. But this version here is at 85%. There is a bigger version that is not playing Slickshot Show Off, instead playing Tolarian Terror, as well as Hearth Elemental. So if you do encounter that, it's just playing a little bit bigger on curve. But core of the deck is Corey Steel Cutter. So playing double spell per turn, Prowess, aggressively slanted deck. There's a lot of cards that just kind of cantrip themselves or draw an extra card. So things like Opt. This version is playing Ren's Resolve as just a way to get some card advantage along with stock up. So just multiple ways to basically play spells, but then just recoup the value that was there. So you're seeing Spell Pierce in the main. It helps in the mirror, just kind of hitting those steel cutters on curve. Helps against sweepers, temporary lockdown, stuff like that. Into the Flood Maw is another way to deal with like High Noon or temporary lockdown, stuff of that nature there. Otherwise, your Rage deck, kind of the regular pieces there. So this version here, we have Dive Down for protection, Ghost Vacuum for graveyard decks. Into the Flood Maw is another effect. We see another Spell Pierce and Negate, cheap counters. Set of Torches, Lithomantic Barrage, very strong against Oculus decks, stuff like that. And then Sunspine Links for the greedier mana bases or things with a lot of life gain. Seen some versions as well play some number of Screaming Nemesis, so it really depends on what you're trying to hit in terms of the metagame. So one thing I wanted to kind of just highlight, if we look at, because Izzet Prowess is kind of the contender of, can your deck beat this deck? It's very effective, it's very like linear, it can put through a whole bunch of damage while replenishing itself. So looking at the win rate matrix for the last 15 days from MTGO, we see the Spellslinger deck at 61%, and it is really like the only bad matchups that have been played at some degree. It seems like the Pixie matchup, the Orzhov Pixie with temporary lockdown, as well as Jeskai Control. Looking at Jeskai Control, which we'll cover a little bit later, the Dragons deck got a reasonable spread against a lot of the decks. It's another higher win rate deck, but we're seeing kind of a decline on a lot of the bounce decks, control decks, stuff like that on MTGO. Moving on, we go to Mono Red Aggro, 73%. So biggest kind of change here is we're seeing copies of Tursa in the main. It started off as a 4-2 split, and now we're seeing 3-3, just another way to kind of replenish your hand. Fewer copies of Monastery Swift Spear offsetting the Tursa. Also seeing a copy of Dire Flare. So just a cheap artifact that can be equipped to trigger Valiant for 1 mana. Gives them a power boost as well, which is nice. Otherwise, your typical mouse package, Monstrous Rage, the whole gambit. Witchstalker Frenzy in here as kind of more stretch removal. Sunspine Links, again, for the greedier decks. Against bigger things, you have Twisted Fealty, Screaming Nemesis. In the red-based mirrors, we have Case of the Crimson Pulse. That this for like the bounce matchups, any of the grindier matchups refills your hand, Torch Tower, and Ghost Vacuum. I actually, so Pyroclasm is an interesting one. I do think it's reasonable against Prowess. They can grow their stuff out, but they're usually inclined to play spells on their own turn, which can deal with a go wide board. So that's something you might want to consider. With this configuration, since you're on fewer Swift Spears and more just the mice, it will hit more of your stuff. So keep that in mind. We then have Jeskai Oculus. So this one's at 67%. So you are going 2 angles. You have Prophecy, Eidetic Memory, just put counters as you draw cards. A lot of the cards in the deck are drawing and discarding. Things like Glacial Dragon Hunt, your Steam Core Scholar, your Tursas, Winter Night Stories, all kind of draw, discard through your deck. You can reanimate Oculus as your key hit with Helping Hand and Recommission. This version's got a Kitsa in here to loot, an Inti, Fear of Missing Out. Just a bunch of ways to kind of loot through your deck, get draw triggers to put with Edict, and then Torch Tower, Spell Pierce, Cheap Disruption, Mako, Early Threat that can scale, and then if you draw it late game, it just cycles. So you don't necessarily need to throw out a 1/1 at that point. Chandra when they attack your graveyard along with Kaido. We have Lauren in here for Artifact Enchantment Hate, Sheltered for the red-based decks, Pyroclasm for Prowess, Mono Red, stuff like that. Counters for the bigger mana decks, Sweepers, stuff of that nature. Destroy Evils, good against Zur decks. Bigger mana decks, Enchantment Hate, and then some Graveyard Hate options. We then have Gruul Prowess. Yes, how many flavors can we make this Corey Steele deck? So Corey Steele slapped into a, we're going to call the main board Gruul, but basically questing red. Questing Druid, kind of that Reckless Impulse effect. Your mouse package, Might of the Meek as a cantrip as well. That works with your mice package. Hearth Elemental. Basically is 2 mana, discard your hand, which oftentimes you'll be empty-handed, and then draw 2 cards, and then its cost gets reduced by the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So a lot of times it's just a 1 mana 4/5. Sideboard, Forge for the Grandier matchups, Pyroclasm like we mentioned, Paw Patch Enchantment, and big flyers, Heritage, Reclamation. So you just kind of have a spread. This one will hit artifacts and could exile graveyard. Gives you just a different way to attack the various decks for like hate pieces. Lithomantic Barrage as Oculus kind of hate, and then Ghost Vacuum for graveyard hate. Then have Azorius Omni. Now there's 2 versions of this deck that we're going to cover. So this version here is the kind of traditional combo route. We're seeing things like Roiling Dragonstorm in here, Stock Up, Meringue River Regent that allows you to draw a discard. And the core of this deck is getting out a single copy of Invasion of Arcavios now, since you could just get Jeskai Revelation. It keeps picking up Invasion, you burn your opponent out that way, and then it gets the copies back from your graveyard over and over and over again. Beza for the aggressive decks, kind of the mid-rangey matchups. Voice against things looking to interact, counter spells. Then you have cheap counters in here. Devout Decree, good against red and black stuff. Then you have Disenchant for hate pieces, and then Get Lost as catch-all removal. There's that version, and then there's this version here. So this one went 5-0 from Nick Bolas 90. Nicol Bolas is playing Omni combo, not Grixis, but this one is got no battle. Instead, what you're trying to do is basically you get your Omni out, you dig, and then you do Founding of the Third Path. Founding of the Third Path mills your opponent, and then you use Meringue River Regent to return the Founding to your hand, and then you just loop Meringue Rivers. So you return the Meringue River and the Founding to your hand, and then cast them both again, and then return it to hand, and then cast it both again. So over and over and over again. So you just mill your opponent out that way there. As far as Dispersal for aggressive decks, you got like Philagi for the Grandier or like aggressive decks, kind of stonewalls your opponent. Voice Victory, similar, and then like Overlord. Stonebrain could be in here to get rid of like combo pieces of your opponent, stuff of that nature, but some of these just become more like a blue-white control deck post-board. We have Orzhov Pixie. So this deck here is the more controlling variant. So you still have your Nurturing Pixie, Sun Pearl Curran, Nowhere to Run, Removal, Hopeless Nightmare shenanigans, but you also have Temporary Lockdown here. Now normally this does hit your stuff too, but the intent is to cast the lockdown, then bounce it back to hand, get all the ETB effects, particularly Hopeless Nightmare, to burn out your opponent that way there, and then just force them to discard, kill their creatures, stuff like that. Lily for grind elements, Lauren, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Preachers, you got Beza, Shieldred, and then some copies of Unholy Annex in here for some grind value. More for the Annex for like the grindier matchups, Wiltleaf for the Pixie Mirrors, Beza for the aggressive decks, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Graveyard Hate, Get Lost is kind of catch-all removal, Grimbauble in here for cheap aggressive decks, and then the rest for hand hate. We then go to Esper, self-bounce. So these, I would say this is slightly more aggressive, but still a mid-rangey deck. With blue, you get obviously access to Fear of Isolation and Storm Chaser's Talent, just more ways to kind of bounce. Kaido in here to cheat out this town combo with Storm Chaser's Talent, and then some copies of Stock Up. Temporary Lockdown again for the kind of aggressive decks. Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. We've covered Destroy Evil, Bauble. A lot of these cards are kind of known at this point. Hand Hate, Authority for the aggressive decks. We then have Azorius Control. So full copies of Lockdown, 2 copies of Day of Judgment, just acknowledging that Sunfall is too slow at this point. Rides End is cheap removal. You have some counters, cheap interaction, and Elspeth Smite. Get Lost, No More Lies, Stock Up refills your hand. Full set of Bezas, some Meringue River Regents, and then Elspeth as your win conditions. And then your sideboard, Wiltleaf for the discard decks, Tashana's for activated abilities, Seal for kind of Graveyard Hate, negate cheap counters, and then High Noon and Authority both can come in against the Prowess decks. We then go to Zur. Really nothing's kind of changed here. You have your Analyze the Pollens to help you find Zurs and the Overlords. Beans draws you a bunch of cards. The sideboard here looks like it also hasn't been really updated that much, where you might want to consider similar to the mono or to the Azorius Control deck. Copies of High Noon in there, copies of Authority of the Consoles, just giving you a little bit more interaction against the aggressive decks. But pretty stock, we'll list it just because it's here for the week, but we cover this week in, week out. Domain's been a deck for quite a long time at this point. We have the Jeskai Dragons deck, or the Jeskai Control deck. This one's at 58%. So you have Shiko that can kind of give you your Snapcaster at home effect, letting you recast things like Temporary Lockdown, Stock Up, Rediscover the Way, any of your kind of burn effects. Dispelling Exhale is a counterspell that gets better with revealing Shikos. Lockdown Explosion as removal. Beza in here as a win condition as well, is kind of stabilizing you. Jeskai Revelation in here as top end with a Meringue and Chandra. Kind of do the best line, or the best thing you could do is like Chandra doubling the Jeskai Revelation for max value there. Also seeing a copy of Quarry Mountain Monastery, just kind of a long game. It's pseudo card draw in your mana base. Jace for kind of the control mirrors, the domain matchup, stuff like that. Beza aggressive decks, activated abilities, Pyroclasm is cheap removal, negate for cheap counters along with change the equations. You have Exercise, just flexible all around removal, a Braid for the Prowess decks, and then Ghost Vacuum for graveyard decks. And then lastly, Soggy Cheerios, top forward with Mono White Ugin, the latest standard challenge. So Beza's Overlords, and then you got a bunch of colorless cards, Maze Mind Tome for card advantage and life gain. Hedron Archive helps you ramp, as well as Iron Crag. You have Get Lost in here as a way to just have some removal, along with Ride's End. Lay Down Arms, since you're a mono white deck, Day of Judgment, Temporary Lockdown, and then 4 Ugin, Eye of the Storm. So mono white control. You have Demolition Field, Myrex, Sunken Citadel in the mana base, along with Fountain Port. Wiltleaf for the discard deck, Dissection Tools for the aggressive decks. We have Exercise, Graveyard Hate, Stonebrain for combo decks, Authority for the aggressive decks. Realm Breaker for kind of the grindier matchups, like Domain, stuff like that. You just start stealing their lands, mill them out, and then Disenchant. What's really interesting of this is just a single copy of Temporary Lockdown. Well, it does hit your Iron Crags and Maze Minds. I'm surprised just not seeing more copies, since how good it is against like the Prowess decks and stuff like that. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, what you think of the mono red, or I guess the Izzet now Overlords of the format. In any case, have a good one, stay safe out there, and we will catch you next week.